When the restaurant door opened, a wave of cold air swept inside, carrying with it the glittering luxury of crystal chandeliers, elegant outfits, and long tables covered with exquisite dishes. But at that exact moment, something unexpected happened. I stepped in, wearing an old gray dress, my hair tied hastily, and carrying a worn cloth bag. The entire room seemed to pause. Every eye turned toward me, and I could feel the quiet contempt passing through the people seated there. That was a dinner I would never forget. Tom, my son, had invited me to this gathering. He said his wife's family, whom I had never met before, were visiting from Paris and wanted to meet me. I knew something about this felt wrong, but I still accepted the invitation. I did not tell Tom who I really was. I did not need to. Everyone believed I was simply an ordinary mother, plain, unremarkable, nothing special, and I chose to keep it that way. I lived in a small apartment, nothing impressive. Every day I went to work at a company where Tom believed I held a simple office job. I never revealed that I was the chief executive of a multinational corporation, that I earned $40,000 a month, that I signed million-dollar contracts and made decisions affecting thousands of people. To me, wealth was never something to boast about, never something I wanted Tom to grow up measuring people by. I wanted my son to grow up in a world where people were not judged by money, and because of that, I lived a modest and simple life, even though I could have lived in luxury if I wished. On that day, when I received Tom's call, his voice sounded different. He seemed to be hiding something, the way he used to when he was a child and had done something wrong. "Mom, my wife's parents want to meet you. They're coming from Paris. Could you join us for dinner with Simone's family?" His voice hesitated, and I could feel the uneasiness behind his words. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked. There was a pause. Then Tom replied with visible discomfort, saying he had told them that I worked in an office, lived alone, and that there was nothing special about me. Simple. That word felt like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. That was how my own son described me, as if I were a problem he needed to explain. A poor mother who could not help her child, someone living a life with nothing to be proud of. So I decided to do something I had never done before. I would let them see me exactly as they believed I was. I would pretend to be a poor mother with nothing but old belongings and endless worries. But deep inside me, a small part still hoped that they would not judge me that way. Hoped that even if I were poor, I would still be worthy of being treated like a human being. The next day, I prepared my outfit for the dinner. Even though I knew the restaurant was luxurious, a place where a single dish could cost as much as a person's monthly salary, I still chose to wear the same old gray dress I had kept for many years. It was out of fashion, wrinkled in places that could never truly be smoothed out. I wore old shoes worn down by time, no jewelry, no watch. The cloth bag had faded and no longer looked like something that could impress anyone. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw only a woman past her youth with nothing left to show off. I took a taxi to the restaurant, and a strange feeling kept rising inside me. I could clearly sense the difference between myself and them. I looked out the window at people walking along the streets, couples holding hands, elegant guests entering restaurants, and I wondered how they would see me, whether they would realize that I was not who they assumed I was. When I stepped inside the restaurant, warm golden lights illuminated every corner. I felt like a stranger in this world. Tom stood there looking anxious, his eyes filled with confusion. Beside him stood Elise, his wife, stunning in a fitted dress with smooth flowing hair, yet she did not look at me. She stared straight ahead with a tense expression, as if I were a stranger intruding into this dinner. But what surprised me the most was not Elise. It was her family. Her mother Claire sat there elegantly in a tight green dress, jewels sparkling around her neck and wrists. Her father Charles sat beside her, an older man with a cold face, lips pressed together, his expression stern. They looked like powerful figures sitting upon a throne, staring at me as if I were some strange fish that had wandered into their world. When I approached the table, Claire lifted her gaze and her eyes swept across me coldly. She gave me a quick handshake, light and distant, as if she did not want to come into contact with my poverty. "Hello," she said in a flat voice that carried no warmth of welcome. I sat down quietly, distant and silent, observing everything. All eyes were on me, yet there was no sense of welcome. No one asked if I was comfortable. No one invited me into the conversation. These people looked at me as if I were only a shadow, someone not worthy of being treated as part of this gathering. Then Claire began to talk about money. She spoke about luxurious vacations, the properties her family owned, watches worth thousands of dollars, magnificent villas. I remained silent and smiled politely. She believed I understood nothing about such things, yet in truth I understood them better than anyone there. Her words did not surprise me, but the contempt, the quiet arrogance, that was something I could not ignore. I looked around the table, seeing the clear division in their eyes, and I knew that this was the moment when everything needed to change. The atmosphere in the restaurant had grown heavy, yet Claire, Elise's mother, continued talking about expensive vacations and the luxury items her family had purchased. Her words were like torches exposing the clear sense of superiority and self-satisfaction that I could not fail to notice. Charles sat beside her with a thoughtful expression, his large hands resting on the table, looking at me as if I were an unavoidable part of the conversation, yet not someone worth much of his attention. I did not react. I said nothing. The whole room carried on as before. The scattered laughter and conversations of people around us seemed as if they never touched me at all. Everything felt like a stage play, and I was the character they never intended to truly see. I was simply a plain and ordinary woman, someone with nothing more than a worn fabric bag and an old gray dress, someone who did not belong in a place like this. I could see Tom's anxiety, his eyes shifting around the table, his hands tightening together as he struggled to figure out what to do. But I did not blame him. He had never truly known who I was, never known what I had done or what I had endured to stand firmly in this life. Tom only saw me as a simple mother, someone with nothing remarkable, nothing worth being proud of. Elise was different. She looked at me with a clear sense of coldness, trying to appear polite when greeting me, yet her eyes could not hide the contempt behind them. She did not understand me. She could not possibly understand what I had gone through to be sitting here at this elegant dinner. I looked at her and felt the distance in the way she spoke, but I did not respond. I simply sat there quietly, observing everything. Then, when the dishes were brought out, the atmosphere grew even more suffocating. The food was presented beautifully, each dish worth the equivalent of an entire month's salary for an average family. Claire looked at me and smiled with pride. She asked if I thought the dish looked appealing. I stayed silent, unsure how to respond. I did not want to become part of this game, a game where everyone measured another person's value by money. After a moment of silence, Claire continued speaking about the success of her family. She talked about her husband's wise financial decisions, about massive real estate investments, about luxurious business trips, mentioning everything as if it were proof that her family stood above the rest. She spoke about money and prosperity as though they were the only things that truly mattered in life. Yet when I looked into her eyes, I saw no joy there, no real happiness. All I saw was emptiness, a quiet lack within her soul. Then Claire asked a question that struck like a decisive blow. She asked what I did for a living. She gave a soft laugh, yet I knew very well that it was not a question asked out of genuine curiosity. She only wanted to confirm that I was nothing more than an ordinary woman with nothing special about her. I offered a gentle smile and did not rush my answer. I told her that I worked in an office. I said that I handled paperwork and administrative tasks, simple things. Claire raised an eyebrow, her gaze sweeping across me as if she had just discovered something mildly amusing, yet she could not hide her contempt. She looked at me like a minor character in her story, someone completely unremarkable. She said she understood, adding that administrative work was not a bad job, though it must be quite tiring. Charles and Elise remained silent, but I could feel their strange looks directed at me, looks that suggested I did not truly belong there. I did not answer. I did not need to explain myself to them. They did not understand me. They had no idea how hard I had worked to achieve everything I had today. I looked at them. People living in a world of luxury, surrounded by expensive possessions, yet lacking the most important thing of all, respect and understanding. Everyone continued eating, but I could not swallow a single bite. I felt as if I were being pressed down by the suffocating air around the table. Part of me wanted to leave, to stand up and walk out of that place. But I knew that if I did, I would lose. I would let them win. I would allow them to keep believing that I was someone insignificant. I took a deep breath and decided to wait. I wanted to see how they would behave when they believed I had nothing. I wanted to witness the words, the glances, the gestures they would offer to a woman they believed was unimportant. And I knew that once I had seen everything clearly, I would not remain silent any longer. The atmosphere in the restaurant had now become as tense as a stretched string. The conversations around us were no longer cheerful echoes of laughter. Instead, there was a heavy silence, as if everyone was waiting for something significant to happen. Claire continued to boast endlessly about her family's luxurious trips, the elegant parties she attended, the expensive vacations at high-end resorts. I no longer listened to her words because I had stopped trying to connect, stopped trying to fit in. Elise's eyes could not hide her contempt. She did not look at me directly. Instead, she kept quietly observing me from the edge of the table. That gaze was filled with judgment, and I realized she had already decided who I was. Just a woman with nothing remarkable about her. A simple woman carrying an old cloth bag, wearing a faded gray dress, her hair tied quickly in a bun, and a face without any makeup. In truth, I could not completely blame her, because I had chosen a simple life for myself, rarely speaking about what I owned or what I had achieved. But I could not remain silent forever. Tom stayed quiet as well, as if he did not know what to do. He sat there awkwardly, his eyes looking at me with regret, yet he did not dare to say anything. Each time he glanced at me, I felt a certain pressure, as though the unspoken words in his heart were circling inside him, the questions he wanted to ask, but could not bring himself to speak. Tom loved me. I knew that, yet I could not ignore the distance within him, a gap I could not erase. Claire continued talking about the success of her family as if it were the most important thing in the world. She boasted about clever financial decisions, luxurious trips, and the expensive possessions her family owned. I did not want to be part of this conversation. Everything about it only made me more exhausted. Yet, I could not ignore it either, because it was exactly the reason I was sitting here, enduring their quiet judgments. Then Claire looked at me with a challenging expression and asked what I thought about her family and everything they had achieved. The question felt like a test. She wanted me to admit that she was more successful than I was, that her family had overcome difficulties and reached enviable achievements. I could not deny a hint of irritation, yet I still remained calm. I replied gently that for me, success was not only about money, success was about the way one chooses to live and the values one follows. Claire slightly raised her eyebrow, as if she did not quite understand what I meant, though I knew she was not truly interested in understanding. She only wanted to prove that her life was the ultimate destination everyone should aim for, and I was merely a small character in that performance, someone not worthy of her real attention. The meal continued under a heavy silence. Expensive dishes were placed on the table, yet I could not taste any of them. For me, this dinner was not enjoyment. It was a test. A test to see how these people would behave when they believed I had nothing, when they believed I was just an ordinary woman, when they believed they had the right to judge me. Then when dessert was served, Claire once again returned to the topic of money and her family's wealth. I could not hold back anymore. I needed to speak the thoughts in my mind. I said that I did not need money to prove my value, and I did not need to live the way they did to feel happy. Claire looked at me, confusion clearly written across her face. She asked what I thought about the way they lived, and whether I believed they were wrong. I answered that it was not wrong. They simply lived in a different world, a world where things like money and power controlled everything. But they should remember that not everyone lived that way. Claire's eyes suddenly became colder. She seemed unable to understand me, but I did not need to explain further. She lived surrounded by wealth and luxury, yet lacked the most important things a human being needed: respect and empathy. She could not understand that not everyone needed money to feel fulfilled in life, and I did not need to prove anything to her. Tom quietly looked at me, and I could sense the shame in his eyes. The question had not been spoken aloud, yet I knew I had delivered a message he needed to hear. In the world of people like Claire, money could buy everything. But in my world, truth and respect were the things that held the greatest value, and I did not need to live the way they did to prove who I was. Even though no one said it out loud, I knew I had made them see me differently. But I did not need their recognition. People like them would always live in the shadow of their own self-satisfaction, while I would live in the light of truth. The lights in the restaurant now seemed dim, as if the entire space had sunk into an indescribable tension. Claire and Elise were still sitting there, their faces filled with self-satisfaction, their voices continuing to recount the achievements and luxurious lives of their family. But I no longer paid attention to those words. What I felt at that moment was not anger or irritation, but a strange patience, as if I were quietly waiting for the exact moment when everything would begin to collapse. I could feel Elise's eyes fixed on me, full of contempt. She made no effort to hide the way she judged me. In her mind, I was nothing more than an ordinary woman, someone unremarkable, someone who simply worked and lived a modest life. But she did not know who I really was, and I had no need to explain myself to her. Let her remain inside her carefully built shell. It meant nothing to me. Tom was still sitting silently, saying nothing. His eyes occasionally moved toward me as if searching for an answer, perhaps even a form of comfort. I knew he felt ashamed about everything that had happened, but there was nothing I could do except remain quiet. He had always believed I was just a simple woman, just an ordinary mother. And now I was going to show him that everything he thought about me had been wrong. Claire suddenly broke the silence with a challenging question, asking what I thought about everything she had just said, asking if I thought their life was wonderful. I looked straight into her eyes without the slightest hesitation and replied that their life might be wonderful with everything they had, but for me it was not everything. My voice was gentle, yet clear enough for her to feel the firmness within it. Claire slightly raised her eyebrow, obviously not understanding what I meant. She said that she did not think I could truly understand, that in this life, money and power were necessary to survive. I calmly answered that I understood, but money could not buy respect and could not buy genuine relationships. They lived surrounded by wealth, yet they lacked the most important thing. Claire let out a mocking laugh and asked if I really believed I possessed those things, asking what I had besides a simple job and a dull life. I replied yes, and this time I held her gaze without any hesitation. I told her I had an ordinary life, but I did not need to hide who I was in order to feel happy. I lived with what I had, and I was proud of what I had achieved. Silence filled the space, and I could feel the atmosphere shifting. Claire and Elise said nothing more, and Tom's eyes, though still carrying traces of uneasiness, slowly changed from embarrassment to realization. He began to look at me differently, no longer with the gaze of a son who loved his mother blindly, but with a look of understanding and recognition. It felt as if everyone was waiting for me to say something more, and I knew this was the moment I needed to reveal who I truly was. I continued calmly, saying that I did not need to prove anything to them. They could think I was poor. They could think I was nothing special, but the truth was that I had lived a life I was proud of. I worked hard, I built a career that no one could build for me, and I had never needed to boast about it. I paused for a moment and looked at Tom. I could see that he was beginning to understand the message I wanted him to hear. In that instant, I felt a strange sense of relief within myself. The pressure was gone. The need to live according to other people's standards had disappeared. My life belonged to me, and I had chosen this path because I believed in it. Elise now seemed confused, unable to understand what I was thinking. She still stood firmly in her belief that money and power were everything. But I knew I had done what I needed to do. I did not need to force anyone to change. I only needed to live truthfully as myself. The meal continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The stories were no longer full of boasting. Everyone remained quiet, and the only sounds were the gentle clinking of dishes, as if signaling that everything had reached its final stage. I did not need to say another word. What I had shown was enough for them to realize who I truly was, and I felt proud of that. After the meal, I no longer felt the need to stay. I stood up, thanked them, and walked away from the table, leaving behind the astonished looks of Claire and Elise, people who still could not accept the truth that life is not always measured by money. As for Tom, he understood now, and I knew he would no longer look at me with that uneasy expression. My steps were steady and unhurried, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I knew I had done the right thing. The lights in the restaurant now seemed dim, as if the entire space had sunk into an indescribable tension. Claire and Elise were still sitting there, their faces filled with self-satisfaction, their voices continuing to recount the achievements and luxurious lives of their family. But I no longer paid attention to those words. What I felt at that moment was not anger or irritation, but a strange patience, as if I were quietly waiting for the exact moment when everything would begin to collapse. I could feel Elise's eyes fixed on me, full of contempt. She made no effort to hide the way she judged me. In her mind, I was nothing more than an ordinary woman, someone unremarkable, someone who simply worked and lived a modest life. But she did not know who I really was, and I had no need to explain myself to her. Let her remain inside her carefully built shell, it meant nothing to me. Tom was still sitting silently, saying nothing. His eyes occasionally moved toward me as if searching for an answer, perhaps even a form of comfort. I knew he felt ashamed about everything that had happened, but there was nothing I could do except remain quiet. He had always believed I was just a simple woman, just an ordinary mother, and now I was going to show him that everything he thought about me had been wrong. Claire suddenly broke the silence with a challenging question, asking what I thought about everything she had just said, asking if I thought their life was wonderful. I looked straight into her eyes without the slightest hesitation and replied that their life might be wonderful with everything they had. But for me, it was not everything. My voice was gentle, yet clear enough for her to feel the firmness within it. Claire slightly raised her eyebrow, obviously not understanding what I meant. She said that she did not think I could truly understand that in this life money and power were necessary to survive. I calmly answered that I understood, but money could not buy respect and could not buy genuine relationships. They lived surrounded by wealth, yet they lacked the most important thing. Claire let out a mocking laugh and asked if I really believed I possessed those things, asking what I had besides a simple job and a dull life. I replied yes, and this time I held her gaze without any hesitation. I told her I had an ordinary life, but I did not need to hide who I was in order to feel happy. I lived with what I had, and I was proud of what I had achieved. Silence filled the space, and I could feel the atmosphere shifting. Claire and Elise said nothing more, and Tom's eyes, though still carrying traces of uneasiness, slowly changed from embarrassment to realization. He began to look at me differently, no longer with the gaze of a son who loved his mother blindly, but with a look of understanding and recognition. It felt as if everyone was waiting for me to say something more, and I knew this was the moment I needed to reveal who I truly was. I continued calmly, saying that I did not need to prove anything to them. They could think I was poor, they could think I was nothing special, but the truth was that I had lived a life I was proud of. I worked hard, I built a career that no one could build for me, and I had never needed to boast about it. I paused for a moment and looked at Tom. I could see that he was beginning to understand the message I wanted him to hear. In that instant, I felt a strange sense of relief within myself. The pressure was gone. The need to live according to other people's standards had disappeared. My life belonged to me, and I had chosen this path because I believed in it. Elise now seemed confused, unable to understand what I was thinking. She still stood firmly in her belief that money and power were everything. But I knew I had done what I needed to do. I did not need to force anyone to change. I only needed to live truthfully as myself. The meal continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The stories were no longer full of boasting. Everyone remained quiet, and the only sounds were the gentle clinking of dishes, as if signaling that everything had reached its final stage. I did not need to say another word. What I had shown was enough for them to realize who I truly was, and I felt proud of that. After the meal, I no longer felt the need to stay. I stood up, thanked them, and walked away from the table, leaving behind the astonished looks of Claire and Elise, people who still could not accept the truth that life is not always measured by money. As for Tom, he understood now, and I knew he would no longer look at me with that uneasy expression. My steps were steady and unhurried, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I knew I had done the right thing. The wind outside the window grew stronger, as if nature itself could sense the shift in the air. After dinner, everything became strangely quiet. Tom was still sitting there, his eyes following me as though searching for answers to things left unsaid, emotions that had never been shared. Elise and Claire, although they had already left the table, still left behind a suffocating atmosphere, as if they refused to accept the reality that had just been revealed. I sat there calm and composed, but inside me it felt like a great wave was rising and crashing. It had been a long time since I last needed to pretend, since I last needed to hide who I truly was in front of anyone. I had lived an entire life where no one truly knew who I was, and now I realized that nothing mattered more than living honestly as myself. But the price of the truth was something I had paid through insults, coldness, and judgment from people who once seemed like they would love me unconditionally. Tom turned to look at me, the silence between us stretching endlessly. He no longer knew what to say. The words I had spoken earlier were too strong, too sudden. He had never imagined that his mother would become someone he needed to see through an entirely different lens. A part of him, I could feel it, still could not believe that I, the hardworking mother he had always known, carried a world completely different from what he had believed. Finally he spoke, asking if everything I had done and everything I had achieved was truly real, his voice filled with doubt and quiet amazement. He asked why I had hidden those things from him. I looked into his eyes and did not rush to answer. I told him that life did not always require us to say everything out loud, especially the things we did not want others to carry as a burden. I had never wanted him to grow up feeling that he could rely on anything other than his own strength. He fell into deep thought, his eyes drifting somewhere far away, somewhere he had never thought to look before. I knew he was trying to piece everything together, the fragments of the mother he believed he had understood so well. But in truth, there were still many secrets within me, many stories I had never shared. And now that the truth had begun to surface, I could not allow everything to pass without giving him a clear explanation. I continued, telling him that everything I had done was so that he could stand firmly on his own. I never wanted him to become someone who lived depending on what others handed to him. That was why I chose to live simply, without display, without boasting. I wanted him to understand that his real value would always lie in what he did, not in what he possessed. Tom said nothing more, but I could see the change in his eyes. He no longer looked at me with quiet judgment, no longer saw me as the ordinary mother he had always believed me to be. Perhaps he had begun to understand that everything I did was not meant to make him proud, but to help him realize that life is not only about outward brilliance. Elise, standing in the corner of the room, still refused to let go. She could not accept that what I said was the truth. The perfect image she had built for herself for so long was beginning to crumble. She tried to speak, but her voice no longer carried the sharp confidence it once had. She said that I could not live like that forever, that I could not hide everything forever. I turned to look at her, my eyes calm and cold. I asked her why not, what exactly was impossible. We can do anything we choose as long as we do not hurt others, and throughout my entire life I had never harmed anyone. She said nothing more. The shell she had built around herself had completely broken apart. Everything she had tried to construct, everything she once felt proud of, now seemed empty and without value. She was simply a fragile person who did not understand the true worth of a life. Tom slowly stood up, and his eyes looked stronger than before. He said he did not know what to do with everything he had just heard. But he understood that I had lived a life worth being proud of, and he would never look at me the same way again. I looked at him, and in that moment I felt something deeply special, a quiet peace, a feeling that I had done the right thing. I no longer needed to prove who I was. I no longer needed to pretend just so others could see value in me. And I knew that from this moment on, I would continue living this way. Not for money or material things, but because I had lived honestly as myself. Elise and Claire stood nearby, their eyes filled with anger, yet I felt nothing. I no longer needed their acceptance. From now on, I would live only for myself, for what I believed in, and for the people who truly mattered in my life. Tom looked at me once again, his eyes shining with trust. It felt as if I had just given him something priceless, a gift that no one could ever take away, the gift of freedom. He quietly whispered his thanks, his voice filled with emotion. I smiled and told him there was no need to thank me, that this was something I had wanted him to understand for a long time. In this life, he had to live for himself, not for anyone else. Elise and Claire still stood there, unable to believe what had just happened, but I no longer cared. My life had turned to a new page, and from now on, I would never need to pretend again. The light from the street lamps outside the window shone into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. The atmosphere inside the house remained quiet, but the tension was no longer hidden. After dinner, everything felt frozen, the truth too heavy to be easily accepted. Tom was still sitting there, his eyes drifting as if he had wandered into another world, a place where he did not know what to do with everything that had just happened. Elise and Claire said nothing more. They simply stood still, their faces unable to hide the simmering anger inside them. I knew that everything had changed, nothing would ever be the same again. But no matter how difficult things might become, I did not regret my decision. For a long time, I had not lived honestly as myself, and now that I had decided to let everyone see who I truly was, there was no turning back. Even if I had to endure judgment or criticism, I was ready to face it all, because this truth had been buried for far too long. Tom finally spoke, his voice hoarse, as if the words were difficult to push out. He said that I truly could not do this, that I could not simply live for myself like this. His hands tightened into fists, and his eyes revealed a clear inner conflict. He said he did not know what to do with everything I had just told him, that he could not understand it. He said I had lived a life hiding everything, not because he could not take care of himself, but because I had never given him the chance to truly see who I was. I looked at him without rushing to answer, giving him time to absorb what had been said. These words were not easy to accept. They did not only touch his pride, they also struck the memories he had carried with him for so many years. I gently but firmly told him that I had chosen to live that way, not because I did not trust him. I wanted him to build his own life, not depend on me. I never wanted him to believe he could have everything simply because of who his mother was. I wanted him to understand that his real value would always come from what he created with his own efforts. He fell silent, my words cutting deeply into his thoughts. I could feel the confusion rising inside him, and I knew the questions in his heart could not be answered immediately, because not everyone is ready to face a truth they have never known before. Elise, standing by the doorway, could no longer remain still. She walked toward us, each step carrying a sense of resistance. Her eyes were still full of anger, yet perhaps she had realized that nothing could return to the way it once was. She said that I should not think things could be so simple. I might have hidden the truth from Tom, but I could not hide it from her. She said she had seen everything, and she could not allow me to destroy their lives like this. I looked at her calmly, my gaze steady and sharp. I told her she could see it as destruction if she wished, but I had only done what was necessary, to protect myself and to protect Tom, to help him understand that life is not always measured by money or by the approval of others. Those things are only an outer shell. If she wanted to know the true value of a person, she had to look at the person themselves, not at what they possessed. Claire, who had been standing behind Elise, could no longer remain silent. She stepped forward and spoke with open contempt, saying that I could not keep living like this forever, that I could not live inside such an illusion, that no one would ever respect me. I looked straight into Claire's eyes, my voice firmer than ever. I told her that respect is not something that can be forced. Only when someone learns to respect themselves can they truly respect others. If she chose to see me as someone unworthy of respect simply because of what I had or did not have, that was her problem. I did not have the time to argue with people who refused to understand me. Tom slowly stood up, and his eyes now looked clearer than before. He was no longer lost in confusion. A part of him had finally begun to understand. I could see him breathe out slowly, as if a knot inside his chest had finally loosened. He looked into my eyes, and the pain in his gaze had begun to transform into understanding. He apologized to me in a quiet voice, saying he had never truly understood me, never truly seen who I was. He thanked me for everything I had done for him, and he apologized for never asking, for never caring enough to understand what I had gone through. But he also said he needed time to fully understand everything I had done and everything I had sacrificed. I smiled gently and nodded. I told him I understood, and that I did not expect him to understand immediately. I only wanted him to see the true nature of things, to understand that the value of a person does not lie in wealth or outward brilliance. We must live honestly as ourselves. Only then does life truly have meaning. The change in Tom's attitude was clear. He no longer looked at me as an ordinary mother. His eyes were filled with respect and gratitude. Elise and Claire could not accept this change, yet there was nothing they could do. They knew they could not alter the truth, and that the truth had already been revealed. The shells they had built around themselves had been torn apart, leaving behind an emptiness that nothing could fill. Silence filled the room, but it was not the silence of conflict. It was the silence of acceptance and understanding. And I knew that even if many difficulties lay ahead, I would never return to the mask that everyone expected me to wear, because I had finally lived as my true self, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. That night, after everything had passed, I sat alone in the quiet room, the dim light casting a soft glow across the tea table. It felt as though everything had stopped, yet the pain and weariness inside me had not faded at all. I thought about the words I had spoken, about the cold looks from Elise and Claire. They could not bear the truth. But was I wrong? Was my decision to let the truth explode, to allow everyone to see who I really was, a mistake? I knew I had to continue down this path, even though it would not be easy. Yet I could not deny that a part of me still longed for understanding and sympathy from the people around me. After all, family is still family, and bonds of blood are not something that can be easily cut away. But at this moment, I could only face this truth on my own. For a very long time, I had lived in the shadows of patience, in silent sacrifices. I allowed people to judge me based on what they saw, based on what I chose to show them. I hid my true self in order to maintain an image that others expected me to be. And now that the curtain had finally been lifted, I could not help but feel an emptiness inside me. That feeling came from having lived for others for far too long, so long that I had almost forgotten how to live for myself. At that moment, I had only one wish, to have a little peace and quiet. The chaotic emotions inside my heart felt as if they had been burned through by the flames of judgment and expectation. Yet I also knew that no matter how much I tried to escape, this truth would always remain a part of me. I could not turn back. What had been spoken, what had been revealed, had now become reality, and nothing could change it. I leaned back and looked out the window where the faint light of the moon touched the ground. In the darkness of the night, I searched for a sense of calm, something to hold on to. I could no longer continue living in the shadows of deception. This truth, painful as it might be, would be the key that opened the door to a freer life. I would no longer allow myself to live inside the golden cage of expectations and pressure. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated, interrupting my thoughts. It was Tom. He did not call often, but at that moment I could sense that something important had happened. When I answered, I heard his voice, deep and tired. He said he thought we needed to talk, his voice carrying a trace of concern. I sensed a change in the way he spoke. He was no longer the son who tried to keep himself safe inside a protected world. I told him that I knew he was worried and asked whether he had begun to understand everything. After a moment of silence, he said he was still trying to understand me, but there was one thing he could not deny. I had forced him to look again at everything he once believed in. I had broken many things inside him, yet at the same time, I had helped him understand more about himself. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing, Yet I could not help wondering whether I had hurt him too deeply. Every time I sensed his pain, my heart ached. I told him gently but firmly that I only wanted him to stand on his own, not live in the shadow of what others expected him to be. I loved him, but he had to walk his own path. He had to face the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. He took a long breath and said that I was right. He had to face it. But that did not mean he had to do it alone. He said he needed me. His words touched my heart deeply. No matter how harsh the world might be, at least in that moment, I knew I was not alone. We continued talking, not only about what had happened, but about the deepest feelings we had never shared before. These were the thoughts and confessions we had never truly had the chance to express to each other. When the conversation finally ended, I felt as though a part of the heavy weight inside my heart had been lifted. I walked back into the living room and felt as if everything around me had become lighter. I realized that even though what I had done forced everyone to face an uncomfortable truth, it was still necessary. Perhaps the people around me were not ready to accept it yet, but I could not continue living in deception simply to avoid hurting them. What mattered most was that I had finally lived honestly as myself. And when I looked back at everything, I could not help but smile. Even though many things were far from perfect, I had found peace within myself. I had accepted the truth, and that was the most important thing of all. The truth, no matter how painful it may be, is always the only path that leads to freedom. The next morning, I woke up with a different feeling. It was not the heaviness of a hidden secret, but the lightness of a heart that had finally been set free. The conversation with Tom yesterday made me realize something important. Sometimes you must set an example for others, even if it causes them pain. But nothing can compare to living honestly as yourself, even when that path is difficult and filled with challenges. On mornings like this, I often sit in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window and watching the first rays of sunlight slip through the narrow spaces of the frame. That feeling brings a small sense of peace to my soul. Sometimes I think about everything I have gone through, about the difficulties I have overcome. The long years of working tirelessly, hiding my success so that no one would feel that I stood above them, and then everything falling apart because of one decision that I believed was the right one. Even though it caused pain, even though it hurt the people around me, I could not regret it. Today, I felt stronger than ever before. I was no longer afraid of gossip or judging eyes. What remained was only myself and everything I had done, and I understood that those were the only things I could truly control. The sound of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, I saw Tom standing there. His face looked tired, yet there was something in his eyes that made me pause. He walked in without saying a word and quietly sat down in the armchair near the window. He said he came to visit me and to thank me for always being there for him, even though he had been too foolish to realize how important I was. His voice was low, as if he had carried the weight of an entire lifetime. I sat across from him without speaking, simply looking at him. A warm feeling suddenly rose inside my heart. At last, my son had realized it. At last, he understood. I told him he did not need to thank me. I had only done what I believed was right. That was the way I had chosen to live, and he too would have to learn how to live honestly as himself. No one else could decide who he was except him. Tom looked at me, and the uncertainty in his eyes slowly began to fade. He said that at first he did not understand why I had done what I did. He thought I was creating a conflict that did not need to exist. But now he understood that I was teaching him an important lesson, that I had helped him see the world in a completely different way. I asked him what he thought about change, about living the way he wanted instead of living according to the expectations of others. My voice was gentle but firm. Tom hesitated for a moment before answering that he believed he was ready to live for himself, no matter how difficult it might be. He said he would no longer allow himself to be swept into the life that others expected him to live. His words felt like a healing medicine for the wounds inside my heart. I had waited for this moment all my life. The moment when my son would understand the value of living truthfully. The moment when he would no longer remain in the shadow of expectations placed on him by society or by family. As our conversation slowly came to an end, I saw a different Tom before me, a grown man rather than the innocent boy he once was. He had found his own path, and I felt deeply proud. Suddenly, the door opened and Claire walked in. Although there was still hesitation in her eyes, this time she did not come with judgmental words. She stood at the doorway and looked at me carefully. She said she wanted to talk to me, her voice softer than it had ever been before. I smiled and invited her to come in, telling her I was always ready to listen. She sat down beside me, paused for a moment, then said she did not know where to begin, but she believed she had been wrong. She admitted that she had judged me too quickly and unfairly, that I was not the person she once thought I was, and that she truly regretted the way she had treated me. Her apology surprised me. I had never expected her to open her heart like that. But I also understood that sometimes people need time and a powerful shock before they can recognize the truth. I thanked her and told her that I understood that feeling because I too had once been someone who was judged unfairly. But she also needed to understand one thing: no one could change what had already happened. What truly mattered was what we learned from those mistakes. Claire fell silent and looked at me. After a moment, she said she wanted to learn. She wanted to learn how to live the way I did, how to stop trying to prove herself to others. I nodded and smiled. I told her that as long as she was sincere, she would find her way. She should not live for anyone else. She should live for herself, because that was the most important thing. In the end, I felt that I had done something truly meaningful. It was not only about guiding my son, but also about opening my heart and giving someone else the chance to change. How strong can a mother, a woman truly be? Not when she forces others to admire her, but when she has the courage to stand up and speak the truth no matter how painful it may be. That day when Claire finally left, I no longer felt tension in the air. Instead, I felt a sense of relief, as if everything had been untangled. There were no more burdens and no more regrets. Everything had passed, and I understood that I was standing at the beginning of a new journey. With every step, I felt freer. Every decision I made from that moment forward was for myself, not for anyone else. And in that moment, I knew that I had lived the right way. Life had changed. It was no longer a series of sad days wrapped in silence, but now a path of steady steps and quiet confidence in myself. Every morning, I woke up without feeling the weight of expectations from the outside world. In the past, I had always tried to hide who I truly was, living in the shadow of those around me. But now I had stood up on my own and faced the truth. I had been honest with myself and with the people I loved, and most importantly, I had learned how to live honestly as myself. That day when I woke up, a deep sense of peace filled me. I knew that it was not only me, but Tom and Claire as well, who were beginning a new journey. The feeling was completely different from the past, when I had lived in secrecy and in fear of the truths I might have to face. Today, I realized that the truth is not something frightening. Instead, it brings liberation. While I was sitting in the living room, waiting for my morning coffee as usual, my phone suddenly rang. When I picked it up, I saw a message from Tom. In the message, he wrote that he was very grateful to me for everything. He said that it had not been easy for us to reach this understanding, but he now knew that I was the most important person in his life. He said he would never forget what I had taught him, and that he would live honestly as himself, just as I had done. Those words from my son made my heart bloom with warmth. It was not simply because of the gratitude, but because I realized that my son had truly understood the values I had tried to pass on to him. That was more precious than anything else in life. Sometimes as a mother, you do not need to be great or perfect. You only need to show your children sincerity, confidence in yourself, and unconditional love. Those were the things Tom had learned. When I put the phone down, a gentle knock sounded at the door. I stood up and opened it. Claire was standing there, and she looked different, no longer hesitant the way she had been the first time she came to see me. Her eyes shone with determination. She said she wanted to talk with me a little more. I smiled and stepped aside to let her in, telling her to come sit down while I made tea for her. Claire sat in the chair and looked at me for a long moment, as if she was searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke and said she did not know where to begin, but she wanted to say that she had changed. She said I had shown her a path she had never imagined before. She admitted that she had lived under the shadow of her family for far too long, always believing that success was measured only by numbers and material things. But now she understood that true success was not what she or her parents had once believed it to be. True success was freedom and peace within the heart. Claire's words were gentle but powerful. I looked at her and could feel the deep change within her. Those words were not only an acknowledgement, they were the result of an inner struggle she had gone through. She had found herself within the complexity of life. I told her that the way she chose to live and the way she chose to see life were entirely her decisions. No one could make those choices for her, not even me. Only she could truly understand what she wanted, and I was happy that she had begun to realize that. Claire looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears she could not hold back. She thanked me for not giving up on her. She said she did not know where life would take her, but she knew that from that day forward, she would no longer live the way others expected her to. She said she would no longer allow money and fame to control her life. I held Claire's hand and gently told her that she would learn how to live freely, truly freely, when she no longer worried about pleasing anyone else. She would take control of her own life, and I would always be there watching over each step she took. That day, we had a very long conversation. Claire's words were like tears of release, helping her free herself from unnecessary burdens. She had found freedom, not only in her thoughts, but also in her actions. When Claire finally left, I felt a sense of lightness inside me, not only because she had found herself, but because I knew that we were helping create a new generation, a generation that would not be imprisoned by prejudice and expectations from society. That night, I lay down in bed with a deep sense of calm surrounding me. I thought about everything that had happened, about the challenges, the encounters, and the changes. In the end, I understood that everything happens for a reason. Those experiences had shaped me into the person I had become. We do not need to chase distant things or live according to the measurements of others. Peace within the soul is what truly matters. I had lived a full life without needing to prove anything or hide anything anymore. And when I sat on the chair beside the window the next morning and watched the sunlight shine through the leaves, I knew that life, no matter how difficult it may be, is always beautiful and worth living. Because I was no longer afraid, no longer worried about pleasing anyone. All I needed was to live honestly as myself. I was grateful to life for teaching me this precious lesson, and grateful to the people around me for giving me the chance to prove that in the end only we ourselves can decide our true worth. Thank you for staying with this story and following it from beginning to end. Every life and every journey carries its own challenges and lessons. But what truly matters is that we continue to believe in ourselves and never give up on the values that genuinely matter. That is the message this story hopes to share. If you feel that this story has brought you reflection, inspiration, and motivation in your own life, please do not forget to share this video with the people you care about. And so that you do not miss more meaningful and inspiring stories like this, remember to press like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Let us build a strong community together, a place where everyone can live honestly as themselves and inspire others along the way. Thank you very much, and I truly hope to see you again in the next stories. Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. I would love to hear your experiences and reflections.